And we're back for part 2 of higher level thinking. Now, where we left off, let me get my laser pointer. We had covered transfer and critical thinking. Now we're going to be moving on to creative thinking and metacognition. So, creative thinking. I love this topic. I think it's something that doesn't get enough attention in the world of education. So first, let's do a little comparison. We just talked about critical thinking in our last video, and we talked about how it's our ability to judge ideas, to make an educated argument, to draw conclusions, right? Creative thinking is very different. So this is the idea of generating ideas, coming up with something new, imagining possibilities and brainstorming and improvising, using intuition. So a very different skill set. Now, when we think of creative thinking and creativity, I think a lot of times what comes to mind is art. And obviously art is one of our, as a humankind, one of our biggest means of creative expression. But there are so many other ways you can touch upon and use creativity in your classes, not just art. Creative thinking is thinking in novel and unusual ways to produce unique solutions. Okay, so novel simply means something new, something challenging, unusual, something not incredibly common, to come up with a solution. So this could really touch base with science and political science and language arts and just about any subject you might think of. In case you're curious of either some of the skills that go along with creative thinking or your own ability to be a creative thinker, here's a creative thinking self-test. If you would like to take it as a self-test, hit pause. You can see up here the rating scale, how you will rate yourself, and you would jot your answers to these 10 items in your notes. So please hit pause now and take a moment to do that if you wish. Otherwise, feel free just to look over the items to get an idea of what goes along with creative thinking, such as coming up with new and unique ideas, being internally motivated and flexible, waking up with a mission, and spending time in settings and activities that stimulate me to be creative. Now, if you did take it as a self-test, here's what you can use to score yourself. You would simply give yourself a grand total for all of your ratings and see where you fit into these ranges to get an idea of your general creativity. All right, so I think this was pretty obvious. It relates to Bloom's level of, well, heck, you don't even need to study Bloom's to know this one because it's the same word, creating. So obviously this is the top of the pyramid. Now here's a video that I absolutely love from Apollo 13. And to me, this shows the essence of creative thinking. And again, emphasizing it's not just about arts and crafts. Okay, so here's creative thinking within the world of science. Let me try that one more time.
Gene, we have a situation brewing with the carbon dioxide.
We had a CO2 filter problem on the LIM module.
5 filters on the limb.
Which were meant for 2 guys for a day and a half. So I told the doctor.
You're already up to 8 on the gauges. Anything over 15, you get impaired judgment, blackouts, the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
They take square cartridges.
The ones on the limb are round.
Tell me this isn't a government operation.
This just isn't a contingency we've remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole. Rapidly.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we gotta come through. We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this. Using nothing but that. Let's get it organized.
Okay, let's build a filter.
Maybe get some coffee going, too, someone.
What a great example. And, you know, this is even something similar you could do with your classes. I've seen gifted programs where they will set out a variety of materials and say, okay, you need to build a bridge from this table to that table, and it has to be able to support 5 pounds. So again, it's just a fun activity you can do with your kids. So here's one for you. Let's brainstorm. What are some creative uses for a pool noodle? During summertime, pool noodles are everywhere. They are something that we obviously use in the swimming pool, but can you think of other uses for it? This is a fun activity you could do for creative thinking. Look at all the possible things you can do with pool noodles, ranging from a way to hold your fishing poles all the way to a way to cover your trampoline springs. So again, there are a lot of different creative types of brainstorming things you can do with your kids. So to compare, convergent thinking is what we've been looking at previously within the world of critical thinking, the more traditional approach where there are questions and assessments with one correct answer. That is how most of our coursework is done. I mean, think about this class. On the exam, isn't there one right answer? Because in most content areas, they are focused on a set of knowledge that the students need to attain, and there's truth in that knowledge, right? That's convergent thinking. Well, what if I told you that there's no right answer? Now, granted, most of the time there is, but sometimes there's more than one right answer, right? That is what we call divergent thinking. This is creative thinking. Okay, so this is where there are questions and assessments with many possible answers. An example of this is brainstorming, like we just saw with the pool noodle. You'll probably notice that whenever I ask questions in class, or here on our videos, they are divergent questions. They are not right and wrong questions. They are questions that have a lot of possible answers because that stimulates discussion. So here's a question and an example of a divergent question. What are some things you can do in your classes to promote creativity? You'll want to consider this regardless of your subject area. In PE, you could set out some equipment and have students brainstorm on a game that they could create along with a set of rules. There are lots of math games that also are creative. So again, subject area doesn't matter here. Here's one instance, the robotics teams at schools. Those allow for a lot of creativity in terms of what they want their robots to do, what the robots are going to look like. Here's another one. So I love this one. So they had a conservation poster contest, and they gave the students a theme and let them get creative with their ideas of creating posters. So again, what can you do to try to improve creativity in your students? Here's a big one. Don't over-control, especially if you're teaching elementary. You know, maybe it's okay if they don't always color the grass green, or if they don't always color in the lines. Maybe let them think outside of the box on those sorts of things. Here's an example that might make that point for you. This is a true story about a little boy named Steve. And more than anything, Steve wanted to be a movie director when he was growing up. And not just any kind of movie director, he wanted to do scary movies. And so he told his parents, I'm going to make some scary movies, and I need something that looks like blood, something that I want to ooze from the kitchen cabinets for my scary movie I'm going to make. And so his mom got out a pressure cooker, bought cans of cherries, and cooked them to make this goopy red substance to serve as blood for his movies. Now, when I got to this point in the story, I thought, whoa, there's no way I'm doing that. That would be horrible to clean up, and the sticky, goopy red stuff all over my kitchen, I don't think so. And I thought, well, let me read on anyway. And they said that little boy Steve grew up to be Steven Spielberg. And I thought, oh my goodness, if I had been his mother, I would have killed Steven Spielberg's creativity. Oh my goodness. So it really was a light bulb moment for me about the importance of not squelching the creativity of our little ones. All right, allow them to make choices. Give them some autonomy. Let them draw what they want to draw. Let them give a speech on what they want to give a speech about. Let them delve into things that are interesting to them. So here's a nice one. So Caldwell Schools, they had a Lego contest where kids could build absolutely anything they wanted to out of Legos. And how great it is that they had that kind of choice. Give students time for creativity. And that's hard to do because, man, we are pushed for time in our classes, trying to fit everything in, trying to cover all of our standards. But when you can, and perhaps do it through your assignments, find ways to allow for a little bit of creativity. Here's another example from Caldwell. So the third graders had an escape room. What a creative idea, fun thing to do with the students, where they worked on things like problem solving and sportsmanship. As a teacher, you also want to show that you value creativity. When you see it, reinforce it. Model it yourself. Try to be creative in the things that you do because your students are observing you and imitating you. I love this one. So this is from Columbus City Schools. They had a National Invention Convention at the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan, and they sent 13 of their students there. Now, if you have ever been to the Henry Ford Museum, you might think, how dull is that? It is an amazing, amazing place. I chaperoned a school trip there a few years ago. Great place for creative, inventive minds. So what a cool way to reinforce and reward that in their students. All right, so that's creative thinking. The last topic for this video is going to be metacognition. Now, it's possible that you have never heard of metacognition before, and if so, that is really cool, and I'm excited to cover it with you. Let's jump in. What is metacognition? It is what do you know and what do you believe about your own cognitive processes. Okay? Well, have you ever thought about that before? In fact, we even call this thinking about thinking. I like this quote, and I think we've seen this one before on creative thinking. Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. Well, we spend time thinking about our content, but how often do you spend thinking about yourself as a learner? Do you know how you learn best? And therefore, do you know how you should study? So, metacognition is something that improves with age. The more self-aware we become, the more introspective we become, the more metacognitive we are. All right, so what does it take to be metacognitive? Okay, I love Will Ferrell. I had to add that. So metacognition includes two things in order to be truly metacognitive. First of all, you need to know yourself. You need to know your own mind, your own cognition, including its strengths and weaknesses. So, how do you learn best? That's a good place to start. Then the other thing you need is to control that cognition for optimal performance. Meaning, if you know that you learn best when you make flashcards and you quiz yourself, that's step one. I know that about myself. Step two is to actually do that, to control your study techniques and your cognition in order to do your best possible as a student. So knowing yourself and actually applying what you know. So for example, studying in a way that you know is going to promote best learning. So it's good from time to time to assess your study techniques and see how well they really match with what works for you. So when it comes to metacognition and studying, I want you to think about this. So this is just a little demonstration. How helpful is it when you take good class notes, and add details and add examples, carefully read the whole text, outline what you're supposed to learn, come up with your own examples and maybe write those down, test yourself, summarize what you've learned, study in groups, or go through and highlight what's important. How helpful are those things for you? That's step one in metacognition, knowing that about yourself. Then step two is, how often do you actually use those strategies? Okay, because you're not being metacognitive if you know what's good for you, but you're not actually doing it. So I love this. Unable to find a highlighter, Wayne Merleman used a black magic marker to cross out all the stuff he didn't want to read again. Kind of the opposite of using a highlighter. Just a little funny. All right, so here's a video talking a little bit more about metacognition.
We know that when you engage children in the design of their learning environments, when you ask them at the end of every lesson, did that work for you? You know, was I too strict? You know, when you really honestly ask for their interpretation of learning, you learn from them and they learn better. What you get is that sort of metacognition. You get a meta level reflection on learning. All the time they're learning, they're thinking about how they're learning. And I absolutely promise you, if that happens for your children in your classroom, they will do 20% better. You get an extra Friday every week in terms of performance. I mean, it's absolutely a secret weapon. Why? Well, because it turns you from being a consumer of learning to being a researcher, a co-producer, an explorer, and that's a much more exciting, more exhilarating role. But also you discover how to learn better, and the children find that, well, actually I'm quite a kinesthetic learner. I like to learn with others. When I'm really tired, I like to be quite a passive learner. For me, learning is about rhythms and pictures rather than, they keep coming up with a whole range of different ways that they learn. And not only do they learn from that, but the teachers teach better as a result.
So again, I think that's a great way to summarize some of the benefits of metacognition. So one of the last things we're going to be looking at is, as a teacher, how can you help your students be more metacognitive? I did not pull this from the textbook. I pulled this from an article on Edutopia about metacognition. So what can you do? And I tried to have this fit pretty much any grade level, any subject. So number one, teach students about having a growth mindset. Teach them about metacognition. So a growth mindset is that idea, and we've covered this one before when we talked about resilience, teaching your students that mistakes are part of learning, that learning is a process and that it's a journey, and that you're going to fall down, but you got to pick yourself up. And teaching them what metacognition is. What those things do is they teach your students that they can grow their own brains, that their brains are constantly developing, and that this is something that they can nurture and use to their advantage. What else can you do? Give them practice with what they don't understand. Okay, rather than focusing on what they already know, give them practice with what they don't know. This can relate to Piaget's disequilibrium. So, the act of being confused, the act of not knowing the answer, and identifying your own lack of understanding is a part of self-awareness. So perhaps even ask your students questions like, well, what was the most confusing thing we covered today? Or purposefully presenting them with that cognitive conflict, that piece of information that you don't think they're going to understand, to help them grow in their own knowledge. What else can you do? Provide opportunities to reflect on coursework. So they're going to be doing all kinds of assignments and homework and things like that, but how often do you actually have them reflect on how they have done? To say, go back through and look at your quizzes and see what types of questions you commonly miss. Or go back through and assess your homework assignments and look at the questions you missed and, what can you learn from that? Or maybe let's build an assignment from that. Help them recognize how they can grow from looking at their mistakes and recognize their own growth. Look at their own achievement. So even ask them questions like, how has your thinking about this course changed from your first day of class until now? Now this one, I know this one has a bit more detail because it was the only way I could really explain it, but I found this one rather interesting. The idea of using a wrapper, and no, I don't mean like a rapper like Eminem, I mean like a wrapper, to increase your students' monitoring skills. Okay, so what the heck is a wrapper in a class? It is a short intervention that encases your activity. So before a lecture, you might want to start off giving them tips on active listening. After the lecture, have them all write down 3 key ideas from the lecture. What are 3 big things you got out of this? Then you share what you think the 3 key ideas are. Have them self-check how their key ideas match your key ideas to see how well they're able to pick that out. So those sorts of things. So start a lesson with something, end a lesson with something, a wrapper to wrap the lesson to help them learn how to be better learners in your class. And then finally, help your students become aware of their own bias, their own prejudices. This is something that will help them become a more flexible and adaptive thinker, because we all have some sort of bias or stereotype or prejudice. Encourage dialogue and interaction between your students. Challenge different types of biases that are out there in society to help them become better thinkers and more open-minded. All right, so that's it. This segment was a little bit shorter than the first one, but I hope it was interesting, the idea of creative thinking and metacognition. Thank you, and I will see you next time.